The Cypherpunks were interested in kind of building technology to assert the kind of rights you have in the physical world, in the offline world, to freedom of association, privacy, and the ability to transact pretty anonymously with paper cash. So they're interested in electronic cash, and then to get privacy for communications in things like Tor and remailers. And their viewpoint was a kind of technology approach, so not sort of lobbying for politicians or regulations, but just build the technology and see if people would adopt it. It's kind of more of a, seek forgiveness rather than seek permission approach. Bitcoin is not entirely a neutral technology in the sense that when people get involved, due to investment or, a friend or however they get involved, they tend to get drawn in, like the so-called rabbit hole exploration, and, become philosophically affected by, thinking about new things in a deeper way. In an ideal world, you would like it to be able to do more things, like to be more private, to be more scalable, be faster. There are a few things which are not perfect, but there are approaches that, improve on that in higher layers. Like, I think it's pretty close to the bleeding edge of what, computer science and people's ingenuity allows it to be. And, it's incrementally improving all the time. There's a lot of very talented and smart engineers that have gravitated towards it. So it really has captured the imagination of some of the best kind of system programmers and network programmers and applied cryptography people in the world.
Today we're talking to Adam Beck. He's the founder of Proof of Work, a cryptographer, Cypherpunk, and the CEO of Blockstream. Could you tell us what the core principles are of Cypherpunks and how the movement started and what's left of it?
Yeah, I mean, the Cypherpunks were interested in kind of building technology to assert the kind of rights you have in the physical world, in the offline world, to freedom of association, privacy, and the ability to transact pretty anonymously with paper cash. So they're interested in electronic cash, and then to get privacy for communications in things like Tor and remailers. And their viewpoint was a kind of technology approach, so not sort of lobbying for politicians or regulations, but just build the technology and see if people would adopt it and sort of reach mass adoption like that. So it's kind of more of a, seek forgiveness rather than seek permission approach. And so I think, they were sort of ahead of the time in a way.
I'm thinking about seek forgiveness. Could you explain that, elaborate?
Oh, right. So I mean, some companies have done this approach. So if there's something which is a gray area where it's not exactly legal, but it's not too clearly illegal, you're not going to get in that much trouble, they will just do it anyway, and then they will, deal with the complaints afterwards. So I think Uber has done that.
Facebook too?
Yeah, well, I mean, Facebook is always kind of abusing privacy rules and getting pushback and legal counterattacks. But I mean, Uber is a good example where they will just expand somewhere even if it's in violation of, taxi medallions and things like that. And then there'll be some counterattack and they'll get banned in some cities, but they'll just keep going very fast in lots of locations. And I think Skype was a bit like that in the early days for one of the first VoIP things, like telecoms, telephone communication regulations, very, very heavily regulated space. And so, they just made software that could allow people to make international phone calls for free. Of course, telecoms companies didn't like it and tried to fight back, but they didn't go and ask telecoms regulators, can we have permission to do VoIP? They just let people download VoIP software on the internet, and the regulators caught up later. So I think really it's sort of observation of the way that society evolves, which is it evolves by what people do, and the regulator's catching up with what society wants as a trade-off after the fact.
Mm-hmm. And you're a prominent figure in the space. You're focusing on privacy, on resistance to surveillance, individual empowerment. Do you think we're still on the right path?
Well, I mean, I think the Bitcoin has, resulted in a new wave of sort of cypherpunk ideas evolving, or people rediscovering, what the cypherpunks were doing. So, I mean, it's Bitcoin is not entirely a neutral technology in the sense that when people get involved, due to investment or, a friend or however they get involved, they tend to get drawn in, like the so-called rabbit hole exploration, and, become philosophically affected by, thinking about new things in a deeper way. So I do think it is a sort of technology that, the thinking, the change in people's behavior and thinking after getting involved and working on it more is sort of improving individual sovereignty and causing people to take a more self-determinative view that, if they want to improve something in the world, they're going to do it just by their own actions unilaterally, rather than complaining to, politicians or government economics activity, to just kind of opt out and do your own thing. And I mean, Bitcoin itself as a sort of savings vehicle is a way to opt out of the kind of whole fiat architecture, of central bank printed money, the inflation, which, some economic schools of thought argue is, pretty much just caused by governments printing money, and not by the economy or not by industry or individuals' behavior, but just by the government printing as a sort of form of taxation. So, Bitcoin gives people a way to opt out, and opt out is sort of a more self-help approach, right? Which is, well, I don't know if anybody else is going to agree, but I can do this myself, and if other people choose to join in, that's up to them.
Yeah, yeah. And as a security architect, do you still see any potential flaws in Bitcoin, or is it as unbreakable as most Bitcoiners say?
I mean, it's bumping up against sort of technology limitations. So, in an ideal world, you would like it to be able to do more things, like to be more private, to be more scalable, be faster. There are a few things which are not perfect, but there are approaches that, improve on that in higher layers. Like, Lightning is better for sort of, it's both cheaper and faster and more scalable. And, you can't really do that. It would be bad. It would make Bitcoin worse if you tried to do that directly in the base layer, because it would reduce the censorship resistance and so on. So it's possible to improve it like that. So, I mean, I think it's pretty close to the bleeding edge of what, computer science and people's ingenuity allows it to be. And, it's incrementally improving all the time. There's a lot of very talented and smart engineers that have gravitated towards it. So it really has captured the imagination of some of the best kind of system programmers and network programmers and applied cryptography people in the world. So really probably the most high security assurance and robustness assurance piece of software in the world at this point. So yeah, I think it's it's a remarkably robust piece of software at this point.
Yeah, good to hear. The purchasing power of hyperinflating fiat is far scarcer than the purchasing power of Bitcoin. Is the term scarcity, which we hear a lot amongst Bitcoin, really the best term to differentiate between Bitcoin and fiat?
Yeah, I think so in a way, because the if you think about why gold is a good technology for hard money that people discovered, was it 6,000 years ago? Is the claim, right? Is because of its properties, that it was scarce and get more involved industrial work. You'd have to dig it up and refine it. And of course, its scarcity is increasing because the supply is finite, right? So Bitcoin, and typically in an online world, information is freely copyable. So, it's very hard to prevent people sharing and copying like movies and music, and the content distribution industry doesn't like that, but effectively it's part of internet physics. That's very hard to stop. And so that makes it quite challenging to have a native scarce asset in cyberspace, right? So now Bitcoin effectively finds a way to do that, and one of the building blocks is actually this kind of proof of work that I was involved with much earlier to Bitcoin, like Hashcash, and there were a few systems before that, which actually is able to create scarcity in a digital form, but in a way, and Michael Saylor expresses it in a colorful way, which is Bitcoin is a portal from the physical world to cyberspace, which is to say, even though Bitcoin itself is a purely digital thing, its scarcity is coming from a very physical, constrained activity in the physical world, which is the mining activity, which uses real physical resources like physical mining machines, ASICs, and real consumption of power. So unlike something which is purely digital and infinitely copyable, or something which is changeable by policy, like fiat money, where a monetary policy committee can decide to create some inflation, like quantitative easing as they call it, that becomes impossible with Bitcoin for a similar reason to gold, which is that you can assay it. So if you receive some gold, there are some processes you can do which can check the purity of the gold and the authenticity of it. And it's the same with Bitcoin. The way you do it is you run a full node and you verify the transactions you receive. And so, Bitcoin has actually a more kind of mathematically stable rate of production than gold, because gold can react a bit. If the gold price is high, the gold mining companies will start to work overtime, work shifts, or they'll reopen a mine that wasn't profitable enough that becomes profitable again. And so it can react, so they can increase the rate of supply if the price is high. Bitcoin is completely uncaring and insensitive to how profitable it is to mine. So, the price is set by the market and the mining just tries to catch up. So that means that the rate of supply is much more constant on its supply curve. So I think, one way to think about it is Bitcoin is just, a new discovery, which is a better form of hard money that's able to make, combine the sort of scarcity, sort of unavoidable scarcity of gold in a digital domain, where obviously digital things have a lot of advantages, which is you can transact them at a distance, you can automate them in software, and you can store them more easily because it's just a small amount of information in the keys, where it's quite challenging to secure physical gold for governments and individuals.
Yeah. But I think maybe the better term would be the fixed supply, because that's a mathematical certainty, and scarcity is kind of an elastic term. And if you would wonder if scarcity is a feature of Bitcoin or whether it's a symptom of the features of Bitcoin, I probably think it's the latter. And if you want to get to the bottom of things, you probably not talk about the symptoms, but the fundamental characteristics, and then I end up with a fixed supply. Because the scarcity is something where, it needs exterior situations to make it happen. It always needs demand, and if you're critical, a bit something from the Bitcoin bubble that you talk about scarcity because it's kind of a pressure to act. It's like a FOMO term. So I think fixed supply is maybe better. That's what I think.
Yeah, I mean, that is if you look at the fundamental invariance of Bitcoin, like the things about Bitcoin which nobody wanted to see because it's part of the technological promise of this, is the maximum fixed supply is clearly one of those. Now the reason I think it's interesting to answer people's question, which is they will ask, is it necessary for Bitcoin to use power? And my answer to that is that, the reason gold is valuable is because there's a limited amount of it. It's scarce. And for that to be the case, there has to be a cost to finding more, to digging it up, right? So I would say that actually hard money needs an unavoidable production cost. Otherwise, it's not really scarce. And that's the case for fiat money, which is there's essentially no production cost because most of it's actually, the cost of producing, 500 euro notes is the same as producing, 5 euro notes and almost nothing. Whereas, and
8 cents I read recently.
so 8 cents, there you go. So it's very fractional, right? And that's even more the case for electronic money. So most money is actually in bank databases now. It's just electronic, right? So there's effectively no cost. So it's purely a policy decision. And, even the most well-intentioned humans just can't help themselves from feeling pressured by current events. And that actually makes things worse. You need a dependable money to stabilize an economy, actually.
Yeah. What are you the most enthusiastic about Bitcoin at the moment?
There's lots of areas of Bitcoin that are, it's very fast-paced. There is always, new innovation waves. There's a lot of Bitcoin Layer 2 activity. So there's ARC and more activity around Liquid, which is sidechain Layer 2 for Bitcoin. So a lot of startups building Liquid wallets now, or Liquid and Lightning kind of hybrid wallets that are Liquid wallets that feel like they're a Lightning wallet. So they're using a trustless swap API by another startup, Boltz Exchange. And Liquid is sort of it's additional capacity for Bitcoin. So there's some traction on sort of the next step of having Lightning running on top of Liquid as additional capacity for, when a Bitcoin price is higher and the fees go higher, typically in a bull market. So I think the technology people like Breeze are trying to get ahead and prepare for that, to have some additional way for people to transact more cheaply and scalably with Lightning. And, the new kind of layer 2 ideas, which are sort of Lightning similar, like ARC. So there's a couple of implementations, a couple of companies working on that. One has implemented ARC on Liquid, actually, because it has extra opcodes that are not yet available on Bitcoin. So they're able to use covenants in their ARC implementation to, show how it would work once covenants come to Bitcoin itself.
Yeah, and what do you think about Nostr?
Yeah, I think decentralization is a good building block. Now, and of course, people who are interested in Bitcoin think about a blockchain as a decentralization method, but there are lots of different decentralization approaches, and so Nostr is an example like that. And of course, it conveys some advantage, which is you're not as vulnerable to the whims and policy views of management of a technology company, right?
It's a huge difference, no?
Yeah, I think that's very positive because in the last few years, it's been exposed that some of the large social media companies have done a very not internet-like thing. They've been captured by the establishment, by the currently ruling political party, to interfere even with an election process and the communications around that, which is just clearly highly illegal activity, and yet they were complicit in. And presumably also from the political bias of the management of the social media companies. So it's really a kind of outrageous kind of situation. So it's created some blowback where there's a fresh wave of reaction. One reaction is the battle for control of social media companies. So Elon Musk, who can be a bit controversial, bought Twitter and indeed improved its kind of reduced the political bias and interference in communications. But the other kind of more cypherpunk outlook is, well, let's have some decentralized technology so there's nobody that could interfere, because maybe Elon Musk will interfere in a different way in the future. We don't know, right? So you're just, even if he is a good steward of that company, it's still a risk that he could.
You still can be forced.
Right, exactly. So if there is no central party, that's just clearly a better situation. And as more of society's kind of virtual town square kind of general conversations are happening online, it's important that society, not be subject to sophisticated communication interference.
Yeah. Last question. Well, I went on Nostr and I'm trying to get more active. Not doing so much yet, but I kind of realized, maybe I'm wrong, that there's no way to actually securely use your private key. So you still have to use your private key. You have it on your phone. Have you ever thought to maybe develop like a hardware to sign your profile on Nostr with Blockstream?
Yeah, I mean, there's some interest in people made feature requests to, add support for Nostr keys in the hardware wallet, so that it's already paired with a companion app. So, and many of the Nostr clients include some Bitcoin capability, like Lightning for instead of liking things, you can kind of tip things with Lightning micropayments. So there are already keys involved and connections to Bitcoin wallets. So it's a small step to actually securing the Nostr identity as a private key rather than a profile on a company's database, right? So then putting that private key in a hardware wallet is interesting because it protects you from kind of identity theft in the sense that if you lose the private key, somebody's stolen your identity effectively, right? So it's difficult to kind of reset that. And of course that happens with centralized platforms too, but here it's decentralized, so it's important to sort of take more responsibility for securing your own profile, as it were.
Well, thanks so much for your time. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for the conversation.